Welcome back, fight fans. This video is brought to you by AB Combat. In the words of the great Shel Sonnen, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And for these 5 fighters, their attempts to gain every possible advantage over their opponents left them at the mercy of the anti-doping agency USADA, their crimes laid bare for the public to see. Here are 5 UFC fighters that were ruined by USADA. Jon Jones. Jon Jones is not only one of the most successful fighters of all time, but he's also one of the most tested athletes by USADA. And look, a lot of big names happen to fall into that bracket, but none of them, and we repeat, none of them, have had quite as many run-ins with the anti-doping agency as Johnny Bones. But here's the thing. While Jon has popped on several occasions for a wide range of issues, such as cocaine use, which, let's be real, wasn't the biggest shock, to far fishier problems like alarmingly high testosterone levels and traces of clomiphene, an estrogen blocker, and of course, the picograms of Turnbull, Jones' track record is pretty abysmal. But to this day, there are many fans who still believe that he is not guilty, calling his repeated failed test a result of contaminated substances he may have taken while out partying. But for a lot of his one-time supporters, watching Jon repeatedly stumble has caused them to truly lose faith in this fighter. Even now, as he successfully recaptured the heavyweight title, there are levels of damage done to his reputation that may never actually heal. You'll see a lot of fighters on this list that have had major performance drop-offs after being found out by USADA. But Jones appears to be fighting as well as ever. So, was he guilty or not? Well, we'll let you be the judge of that. Victor Belfort. You know that a fighter is infamous for cheating when they have an entire era of their career named after their misdemeanor. By the time fans of the UFC got their first look at TRT Vitor, we had already watched this legendary Brazilian growing up before our very eyes inside the octagon. As one of the earliest veterans of the UFC to still have their place right at the top of their division, when Vitor somehow managed to get an exemption from the TRT ban that was in effect, fans watched as this aging middleweight contender got a new lease of life. It was like something out of a science fiction movie. Belfort became perhaps the most explosive fighter in UFC history at that point, finishing Michael Bisping, Luke Rockhold, and Dan Henderson with thunderous knockouts, eventually booking himself a place in there with the divisional champion Chris Weidman. However, before Vitor was able to get in there with the champ, he was flagged for his TRT usage and was forced to go clean for the first time in years, and you could just see the man's body change. It was as if time finally caught up with Belfort, and on fight night, Weidman put in a dominant shift, beating his clearly compromised fighter with ease to defend his 185-pound crown. Ruslan Magomedov. Ruslan Magomedov is a member of Team Khabib who was given a lifetime ban by USADA for testing positive a whopping 3 times while in the UFC. He's not the only member of that team to get in hot water with the anti-doping agency, but his story is by far the worst. When Magomedov popped for the first time, it was clear something was up. When he popped for the second time, it was obvious that he hadn't learned his lesson. In the end, 3 failed USADA tests were enough to see Ruslan overstep his limits entirely. And despite going an impressive 14-1 as a pro before this issue, he was very clearly using anabolic steroids to enhance his performance. And in 2015, after USADA decided to give him the boot once and for all, Ruslan returned to his home country of Russia, fighting under the ACA banner where the testing is far less invasive. Since leaving the UFC, his form hasn't really picked up, with a 1-2 record that included a brutal KO loss. It's an unfortunate way for a promising career to end, but in reality, who knows how Magomedov would have done had he not been juicing the whole time. TJ Dillashaw. TJ Dillashaw was already something of a villain by the time his flyweight title showdown with Henry Cejudo came around. After proving himself to be one of the finest bantamweight fighters of his era, Dillashaw was embroiled in memorable feuds with Dominic Cruz first, and then, eventually, his old gym team Alpha Male over the course of 2 amazing fights with Cody Garbrandt, but in this time, the fans started to realize that TJ was one of the most insanely competitive people in the sport. So competitive, in fact, that it made him a bit unlikable at times. When he lost, it was never his fault or legitimate, and the whole snake in the grass thing turned his bantamweight legend into a very easily memeable character. But when Dillashaw tried to make an inadvisable trip down in weight to earn flyweight gold, he soon realized that he had bitten off more than he could chew with that weight cut. The champion Cejudo easily ran through him on fight night, TKOing him in one of the earliest exchanges. A shocking finish. But the true shock would come when it was revealed that Dillashaw had tested positive for EPO and would have to serve a 2-year ban from the sport. To TJ's credit, he owned up to it pretty quickly, claiming that he had only used the substance during his lone flyweight champ to help him with the arduous weight loss. But either way, the dude's reputation as a cheater was set in stone in the eyes of the fans. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar? A PED user? Well, if you do have that WWE figurine of this pro wrestling champion still in your bedroom, we may have some bad news for you. Okay, with that out of the way, of course everyone was totally aware of the fact that Brock Lesnar was on something. The dude has some crazy genes, yes, but something truly suspicious was afoot when he returned from retirement on short notice for the landmark UFC 200 event. Again, it's not like everyone didn't know that Brock was clearly on something. In fact, his career in the WWE practically requires you to use substances that are on USADA's extensive ban list. But when the anti-doping agency decided to give him a full-on exemption from their usual 6-month window of testing post-retirement, it was pretty crazy to see. We all knew that the UFC needed this massive pay-per-view draw to bring in the numbers. But the fact that USADA themselves turned a blind eye to their rules so easily really put their reputation into question. And after winning his fight with Mark Hunt on the scorecards, the bout was rendered a no contest for Lesnar after he popped for a banned substance. Was anyone surprised? Of course not. But it was almost as if the UFC knew he was going to test hot and just let him fight anyway. This led to Mark Hunt launching a lawsuit against the organization. A total mess on all fronts. Thanks for watching, fight fans. We'll be back soon.